I can take a 5 out. And I can cancel out that variable. All right, I have an x over here and an x down here that I can cancel. All right, that just created a restriction. So when I rewrite my answer and I rewrite 3 over 2, I still want to give a little restriction that x can never be equal to 0. I know that there's no variable left in there, so I'm not ever going to be like plugging something in and trying to figure out what the expression is, because the expression is always 3/2. But I still want to put that for right now because I want to get in the habit of always remembering, like, when I cancel a variable, something happened. Okay? So always changing it to multiplying by a reciprocal.
You move it up.
I sure can. There you go. All the way up there. Yep. So we'll do a couple more. All right, so here's one thing that you can do. All right, I know that I have to factor. So if you look at the first fraction, right, the first fraction is always going to be left alone, and it's the right-hand one that I multiply by the reciprocal of. So what I'm going to do is, even though I still have to do that step, I'm going to actually factor out the first fraction so that way I don't have to do it again later. So between the minus 5y and the 10, I'm going to take out a minus 5. Right. So I'm just going to factor out that negative 5 so that way it's kind of like skipping a step later on, because that fraction is equivalent to the first one, and the one I'm trying to change is the right-hand one. That's the one that I have to multiply by the reciprocal. And so if I factor out what I have to deal with in the first one before I write it, then now it saves me time because everything is already in factored form. So what do I have? I can cancel out a y. All right. Again, that's going to create a restriction. And I can cancel out my y minus 2. And so all I'm left with is a negative 5 over 3. And I got to remember the two values y could not be. And because maybe you don't have this fraction over here, and if you were sitting here and you were just asked to evaluate the beginning, and I use a 0 or a 2, something bad is going to happen. So I just want to remind myself that if I were using the original information, that I'm not allowed to use those two numbers. Make it a little more complicated on you. You're almost done. Right. So again, variety. So I've got x squared plus 8x plus 16. And then again, in the denominator, like these right here are contained together. And then I want to divide by this other fraction where I have some part that doesn't need to be factored, but I'm going to have to modify. So I'm going to go with the same strategy as letter E, where I'm going to factor the numerator of that first fraction. And this is going to be an x plus 4 times x plus 4. Again, because the only two factors I have to get 16 that add up to be 8 are 4 and 4. And then I have my x minus 1. Now, when I change this, I know that that denominator on the right-hand side is going to become the numerator. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to write it down yet. I want to factor it when I write it down. So instead of flipping it first and then having to take a whole nother line to go through and refactor, I'm going to know that that's what's going to get put up top, and I'm going to factor it now. So I have to think about two numbers that multiply to be positive 1, add up to be negative 2, Well, the only factors of 1 are 1 in itself. And again, you can use area boxes for any of this stuff. Right? I'm doing more of like a shortcut, kind of a quicker method. All right? So if I know that I have to take that right-hand fraction and flip it, I'm going to flip it and factor it at the same time. And now we can cancel. So go through and start canceling what they have. They both have an x minus 1 and an x plus 4. And so what's going to happen is I'm not going to be left with any factors in the denominator. The only factors I have left are x plus 4 in the top and x minus 1. And that's it. But again, like, what could I not use? Because I just canceled out two things. I can't use 1 and negative 4. Those are the only two things I can't use, but everything else is fair game. All right, so some of the stuff we're going to be doing is going to be a combination of that, so that way we can start simplifying down some multiplying and dividing. All right, it's all about factoring and going through the steps. All right.